The sun had barely risen over the outskirts of Millstone Valley when I noticed the shiny black SUV parked just past the bend of my long gravel driveway. I didn't know it then, but that vehicle marked the beginning of a chain of events that would test my patience, my wits, and the limits of the law. For years, my barn had stood at the edge of my property, a modest structure of weathered wood and steel roofing, housing old farming equipment, a couple of motorcycles, and a few treasured antiques inherited from my grandfather. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it represented decades of effort and family history. The SUV belonged to the notorious HOA officer, Karen Willoughby. Karen wasn't just a minor annoyance. She was a legend in our valley for her aggressive and sometimes questionable enforcement of rules. She had a history of pushing boundaries, and neighbors often whispered about her overstepping her authority. But I had tried to stay out of her way, paying my dues on time, following every guideline, and keeping my property neat. Until now. I stepped outside to water my front garden, trying not to draw attention, but Karen's SUV idled like a warning sign. She was scanning my property with those hawk-like eyes, probably already inventing reasons to find me. My phone buzzed with a text from a friend, the words making my stomach tighten. Heard Karen sending patrols after your barn. Be careful. I frowned. Patrols? After a barn? I muttered, shaking my head. It didn't take long for the first signs of escalation. The HOA had recently passed a series of maintenance compliance inspections, and Karen had taken personal offense at my rustic, slightly unpainted barn siding. She had argued that the peeling paint constituted a violation, despite the barn being structurally sound. I had attempted to reason with her, providing inspection reports and photos that confirmed the barn was safe. But Karen wasn't interested in facts, she was interested in power. By midday, my instincts screamed that something was off. I heard tires crunching over the gravel, and sure enough, a white pickup emblazoned with the HOA insignia rolled up. Two uniformed officers stepped out, clipboard in hand, ready to cite me for unauthorized barn appearance. Their tone was courteous, but firm, the kind of politeness that hides impatience and veiled threats. I asked them to wait while I finished organizing some supplies, my hands trembling slightly. I wasn't about to give them an excuse to escalate. As I watched them fidget and glance toward the barn, I realized Karen wasn't just going to stop at threats. She wanted access, and probably under some pretense that would hold no legal water. I had a decision to make: let them inspect and risk further harassment, or stand my ground and hope the law was on my side. I chose the latter. That evening, after a tense standoff, I received a formal notice from the HOA. Immediate compliance required. Failure to allow inspection may result in legal action. My first reaction was disbelief. I had complied with every reasonable request, and yet here I was, being treated as if I were hiding something illicit in my barn. But I also knew Karen, she thrived on drama. This was a power play, and I couldn't let it succeed. I contacted the county sheriff's office the next morning. Sheriff Daniels had been a friend of the family for years and had always been fair. After explaining the situation, he promised to swing by and ensure that any inspection would follow the law. If Karen or her patrols try anything illegal, we'll handle it, he said, his voice calm, but carrying that unshakable authority that only comes from years of experience. I felt a surge of relief, though a part of me still worried about what Karen might try. The night before the confrontation, I spent hours walking around the barn, checking locks, verifying inventory, and ensuring that nothing could be misinterpreted. Old farm tools lined the walls, a few motorcycles covered in dust rested in corners, and my grandfather's antique plow leaned quietly against a support beam. Everything was ordinary, legal, and completely mine, but Karen wouldn't see it that way. Just after sunrise, I saw her SUV again. Karen stepped out, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning for any reason to escalate. This time, I wasn't alone. Sheriff Daniels had parked his cruiser nearby, and 2 deputies followed him inside my property. The sight of law enforcement sent a ripple through Curran's face, pride and arrogance meeting accountability. Curran tried to approach the barn, muttering something about inspection rights and enforcement policies. I stood at the threshold, calmly stating that no one would enter without proper legal authority. Her patrol members exchanged nervous glances, the tension thick enough to slice with a knife. The sheriff's presence made all the difference. "You'll follow the law," Daniel said firmly, voice echoing in the crisp morning air. "Anything else will be considered trespassing." Karen's lips tightened, her fingers gripping her clipboard as if she could assert authority through sheer force of will. She tried to speak again, but the sheriff raised a hand, halting her mid-sentence. Karen wasn't used to resistance, especially legal resistance. Her patrol hesitated, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. I could feel my pulse in my ears, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. Everything depended on control, patience, and the law. By late morning, Karen realized that she couldn't bully her way in. Her SUV departed slowly, the patrol following with expressions of frustration. The sheriff stayed a little longer, making sure everything was documented and secure. I watched Karen disappear over the hill, a storm of rage and humiliation behind her carefully composed face. I felt an odd mix of triumph and anxiety. The battle wasn't over, it had only just begun, but for the first time, I realized I had the upper hand. Karen had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and most importantly, underestimated the value of having allies in the right places. The barn, my sanctuary, remained untouched. That afternoon, I sat inside the barn, sipping coffee, running my hands over the worn wood of my grandfather's plow. The sheriff had left, promising to monitor any further HOA actions. I allowed myself a small smile. Karen may have tried to assert dominance, but today, the rules had protected me. And if she tried to cross the line again, she would learn the hard way that I wasn't just a property owner, I had the law on my side, and I was ready. Karen Willoughby never knew how to quit. The next week brought a series of escalating tactics that tested my nerves and my resolve. First came the letters, meticulously detailed with citations, each more ridiculous than the last. There were claims about the color of my barn doors, the alignment of my roof panels, even the way I stored hay in the corner, though I hadn't stored hay in years. The language was formal, threatening, and designed to intimidate. I printed copies of each notice and filed them meticulously, alongside photos and proof of compliance. The sheriff had advised me to document everything: emails, letters, even social media posts. "Karen plays dirty," he had said, "but if you cover yourself legally, she has nothing." I took his words seriously, but there was annoying tension in the pit of my stomach. Then came the patrol visits. At first, they were infrequent, just a couple of young HOA officers driving slowly past my property, pretending to observe compliance. But soon, the patrols became more aggressive, circling my barn multiple times a day, flashing flashlights through the windows, sometimes banging on the door. Each time, I called the sheriff, who arrived promptly to de-escalate. One night, around 10 p.m., I noticed headlights slicing through the darkness toward the barn. My heart sank. Karen's patrol was attempting a nighttime inspection. I quickly locked the doors and called the sheriff. Within minutes, Daniels arrived, his cruiser lights cutting through the night like a beacon. The patrol was caught off guard. They hadn't expected me to call law enforcement before they could act. "Leave," Daniels instructed firmly. "Now." Karen's voice, shrill and commanding, echoed from the SUV. "You don't have authority over this property." "Actually," Daniels replied, "we do when it comes to preventing illegal entry and harassment. You're trespassing if you step another foot toward that barn." The tension was palpable. Karen shouted orders to her patrol, and for a moment, it seemed like they might defy the sheriff. But authority has a way of enforcing itself, and after a few heated words, the patrol withdrew, leaving Karen scowling in the driver's seat. I felt a thrill of relief tempered by adrenaline. She was relentless, but I wasn't helpless. By the next day, news had spread in the community about the standoff. Neighbors whispered about my confrontation with Karen, some expressing admiration, others wariness. Karen's reputation took a hit, though she never admitted defeat publicly. Instead, she escalated in more subtle ways, sending emails to neighbors about barn safety concerns and posting notices about community compliance, hoping I would cave in from social pressure. I refused to give in. Every notice was countered with documentation, every rumor addressed with facts. I could see the frustration building in Karen's emails, each word dripping with irritation. She underestimated my determination, assuming that I would eventually crack under constant pressure. She didn't realize that the sheriff's involvement had tipped the scales. A week later, I woke to the distant roar of engines on my gravel driveway. My instincts immediately went on high alert. It wasn't just any engine, it was Karen Willoughby's SUV, accompanied by her patrol and a convoy of black and white vehicles, their lights reflecting off the early morning dew. This time, it wasn't subtle. Karen had decided to escalate everything in one bold move, a forced entry into my barn, hoping to catch me off guard. I didn't panic. I had prepared for this moment. The sheriff had advised me on every step, and I had taken measures to secure the property legally. As the convoy approached, I called Sheriff Daniels. "They're coming," I said calmly, though my heart pounded. "They intend to force their way in. Stay inside," he instructed. "We'll be there within minutes. Don't engage them physically. Let us handle it." Minutes later, the patrol arrived at the barn, their footsteps heavy against the gravel. Karen strode ahead, clipboard in hand, barking orders like she was a general commanding troops. "Open the doors," she demanded. "You are required to comply under HOA regulations." I leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed, pretending not to flinch. I knew the sheriff was close. Karen's patrol members exchanged nervous glances, some hesitating as though unsure whether to follow their leader into what could easily become a legal nightmare. Then came the sound I had been waiting for, the sheriff's cruiser, lights flashing, screeching to a halt at the edge of the barn. Sheriff Daniels and 2 deputies emerged, moving quickly but deliberately toward the scene. The air seemed to freeze with anticipation. Karen's confident posture faltered slightly, her eyes narrowing as she saw the law enforcing the law she had tried to circumvent. "You are not entering this property without proper legal authority," Daniels said, voice echoing through the morning air. "Step back, or you will be detained for trespassing." Karen's face twisted in anger. "This is an HO matter. You have no right. Your rights end where the law begins," Daniels interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Any attempt to enter will be met with immediate legal action." The patrol hesitated, tension radiating from their frozen bodies. Karen tried one last tactic. She waved her clipboard, reading regulations verbatim, hoping sheer volume would intimidate, but the sheriff was prepared. He calmly produced a copy of the law outlining property rights and the limitations of HOA authority. Reading it aloud, he detailed how no HOA member, patrol, or officer could force entry without a court order. One by one, Karen's patrol stepped back, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. Karen's fury boiled, but the law and the sheriff had cornered her completely. She snapped at her patrol, but her words fell flat. They had seen the authority of the sheriff, the consequence of illegal action, and they refused to proceed. In a final act of defiance, Karen attempted to step toward the barn herself. Daniels moved swiftly, standing between her and the barn doors. "You will not touch this property," he said firmly. If you do, you will be arrested. For a long moment, she glared, her chest heaving with rage. I watched silently, heart racing, but steadied by years of preparation. Then, with a dramatic toss of her clipboard, she stormed back to her SUV. The patrol followed, some avoiding eye contact, others casting backward glances filled with shame. Within minutes, Karen's convoy had disappeared down the gravel road, leaving a trail of dust and humiliation behind. I exhaled slowly, realizing the intensity of what had just occurred. My barn was safe, untouched, and still mine. But more importantly, the line had been drawn. Karen Willoughby and her patrol could no longer harass me without consequences. Sheriff Daniels clapped me on the shoulder, a rare smile breaking his usually stern demeanor. You handled this well. You stayed calm, you documented everything, and you let the law protect you. That's how victories like this happen. Over the following days, word spread quickly through Millstone Valley. Neighbors whispered about the audacity of Corinne's attempted forced entry and her ultimate failure. Some praised my patience and composure, others simply shook their heads at her overreach. I kept a low profile, tending to my property, checking logs, and enjoying the newfound peace that had been hard-earned. Karen didn't disappear entirely. She continued to send emails, post notices, and issue ridiculous claims, but no one took her seriously anymore. Her credibility had been shattered by her failed attempt to circumvent the law. Even her patrol, once eager to obey, began questioning her authority. It was remarkable how quickly power shifts when someone finally stands their ground, fully supported by the law. I spent that evening in the barn, running my hands over the aged wood, touching tools that had been in my family for decades. The sun was setting, casting warm orange light across the floorboards. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. My property, my grandfather's antiques, my motorcycles, they were all untouched, preserved not just by locks or fences, but by knowledge, preparation, and allies willing to uphold justice. In the weeks that followed, I met with the sheriff occasionally, ensuring that any minor action from Karen would be documented and addressed. Every move she made was scrutinized, and she quickly realized that harassment was no longer an option. Millstone Valley learned a valuable lesson about boundaries, authority, and the consequences of overreach. And I learned something equally important: standing firm. Knowing your rights and having the law on your side is a powerful combination. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the HOA, carefully worded, avoiding any direct threats or citations. Karen had been forced into a new strategy: compliance and avoidance. I smiled as I read it, folding the paper neatly and placing it in my archive. This was the final act in a drama that had begun with a simple accusation about peeling barn paint. The barn stood tall and proud at the edge of my property, a silent witness to a battle fought not with weapons, but with knowledge, patience, and legal authority. I had defended what was mine, confronted intimidation, and emerged victorious. Karen Willoughby's legacy in Millstone Valley was now one of cautionary tales, a reminder of what happens when hubris meets the law. That evening, I stepped outside, watching the sun dip behind the rolling hills, the barn bathed in golden light. It was more than a building. It was a symbol of resilience, of standing firm when challenged by those who believed rules applied to everyone except themselves. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of satisfaction and closure. For now, peace had returned to my property. The barn was safe, my rights were respected, and Karen had learned that intimidation would never work against someone who knew the law and had the courage to enforce it. And as the stars began to dot the night sky, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories aren't fought in courts or battlefields, but in quiet moments where courage meets justice and the truth shines brighter than fear.